Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the next installment of our Learning at Lunch webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about WIOA and pre-employment transition services. I'll let our speaker introduce herself in just one second. I just wanted to do some housekeeping in the very beginning here and welcome you. I will be our moderator today. And my name is Mike Marotta. I'm the director of the Richard West Assistive Technology Advocacy Center. If you want to reach out to us, there's all our contact information, our website, my email address, and our Twitter handle. We are the New Jersey Assistive Technology Act project. And so please reach out to us for any of your questions and concerns related to assistive technology. As we do some quick housekeeping, nothing too intense here. We are recording this, so you'll be able to go back and review it later. Once the recording is posted up on our ATAC YouTube channel, I'll send out a link to everyone to let you know where it lives so you can watch it again if you choose. We also have muted everybody. So right now, all the participants are muted. If you have a question, we will leave some time at the end to go over some questions. I'll also monitor the chat window throughout the session. If you have questions or comments or ideas or just anything that you want to share with the rest of the group, drop them in the chat window. When I find a good moment maybe to jump in, I'll stop sharing and we'll just kind of jump in real fast and we'll chat about it. And then we'll catch up with everything else at the end. So please feel free to participate. That's part of the fun in one of these webinars, is getting your questions answered and making sure that you find some value in the topic that we're working for. So I'll leave this idea of any questions before we start. I didn't really give you much to actually have a question about, but maybe you have a question. Hopefully you're hearing us just fine. Right now there is no video. Neither of us are sharing our video, so there's not anything to see except the slide presentation. So you'll see the slides and then you'll hear our voices as we come in and out. And again, I'll mute everybody as they come in. If we have some late arriving individuals, I'll make sure I mute them as we go. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll turn it over to Sherry, let her share her screen, introduce herself, and we'll get going on the content for today. So Sherry, thank you very much for being here today.
You're quite welcome, Mike, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's always wonderful to work alongside of people who share common interests with our agency, and that's providing services and supports to persons with disabilities to help them enter into the competitive labor market. So what I want to do today is basically just talk to you all a little bit about Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act and pre-employment transition services and what those services actually look like. So let's get started with the presentation. So in order for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services to implement a pre-employment transition service project, we have to find out why it was necessary. So the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, as amended by the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, basically emphasizes the provision of services to students and youths with disabilities to ensure they have opportunities to receive training and other services necessary to achieve competitive integrated employment. It expands the population of students with disabilities who may receive services and the kinds of services that the VR agencies may provide to youth with disabilities who are transitioning from school to post-secondary education and employment. It increases opportunities to practice and improve workplace skills, such as through internships and other work-based learning opportunities, and it requires VR agencies to reserve not less than 15% of the federal VR allotment to provide or arrange for the provision of pre-employment transition services for students with disabilities transitioning from school to post-secondary education programs and employment in competitive integrated settings, and that these services be coordinated with the local education agencies. I want to point out the 15% allotment. Some have taken that to mean that VR has gotten an additional 15%. of their federal allotment just for the provision of pre-employment transition services. It's just the opposite. We're diverting 15% of the federal allotment from adult case services for the provision of pre-employment transition services. So it's not an additional 15%, it's a diverted 15%. So let's begin by defining who a student with a disability is. A student with a disability is an individual who is in an education program and meets certain age requirements and is eligible for and receiving special education or related services under IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or is an individual with a disability for purposes of Section 504 of the Act. And Section 504 is basically for students who might have disabilities that don't encompass a learning or neurological or intellectual impairment. Some education programs include secondary education programs, which are your high school programs, non-traditional or alternative secondary education programs, including homeschooling, post-secondary education programs, and other recognized education programs, such as those through the juvenile justice system. The age range requirements for a student with a disability. This is the federal definition, which is not younger than the earliest age to receive transition services under IDEA, or not younger than the earliest age, if determined by the state as being different, to receive pre-employment transition services. The maximum age is not older than 21 years old, or not older than the highest age determined by the state to receive services under IDEA, if older than 21. So in New Jersey, it's 14 to 21. Let's now define a youth with a disability. A youth with a disability is an individual with a disability who is not younger than 14 years of age and not older than 24 years of age. There is no requirement that a youth with a disability be participating in an education program. The age range for a youth with a disability is typically broader than that for a student with a disability. Now, a youth with a disability that's not engaged in any secondary school program is generally your youths who have decided to leave school before graduating or before receiving their high school diploma. It could be that youth that doesn't have a GED. So there's a lot of reasons, unfortunately, why youth leave school before completion. But this population can also be serviced with these 5 services that we will talk about going forward. So if we look at an overview of what pre-employment transition services are, these services are an early start at job exploration that must be made available statewide to all students with disabilities in need of such services, regardless of whether a student has applied for VR services. They may begin once a student requests or is recommended for one or more pre-employment transition services and documentation of a disability is provided to the VR agency. The services assist students with identifying career interests to be further explored through additional VR services, including transition services. The services must be provided or arranged in collaboration with the local education agencies or the school districts. And they're the only activities that can be paid for with funds reserved under Section 110 of this particular law. So, the population to receive pre-employment transition services. Pre-employment transition services are provided to students with disabilities who are eligible for VR services or potentially eligible for VR services. For example, all students with disabilities, including those who have not applied or been determined eligible for VR services. And I'll explain this a little bit more in detail going forward. There are 5 required pre-employment transition services. The 5 required activities or pre-employment transition services of the Act, and which can be provided in a group setting or on an individual basis, are job exploration counseling, work-based learning experiences, which may include in-school, after-school, or community-based opportunities, counseling on opportunities for enrollment and comprehensive transition or post-secondary education programs at institutions of higher education, workplace readiness training to develop social skills and independent living skills, and instruction in self-advocacy, which includes peer mentoring. So the allowable expenditures incurred in carrying out these activities may be paid for with funds reserved for the provision of pre-employment transition services. So in summary, pre-employment transition services are all 5 of these things, only these 5 activities. We're going to now look at some examples of what the 5 services look like. To start with, we're going to explore job exploration counseling. General job exploration counseling in an individual or group setting can be provided in a classroom or one-on-one in the community setting and could include information regarding in-demand industry sectors and occupations, as well as non-traditional employment. In-demand industry sector employment is very, very important because all too often as rehab professionals, we find students have been trained in a specific industry, but then when they graduate, there's very little employment in that industry. At VR, we try to do just the opposite. We try to introduce students and consumers with what jobs are in demand because we know there's longevity there for them and that they can ultimately reach their goals if there's an in-demand industry occupation that they're interested in. So we take this very, very seriously when it comes to exploring jobs and where the in-demand industry sectors are. Additionally, providing information about labor market composition, where the jobs are in the state, whether you have to travel to North Jersey or South Jersey, or if they're even in the state. Administering vocational interest inventories, just to help a person understand exactly where their skills and strengths are. Identifying career pathways of interest to the students. Career pathways is another strong buzzword that WIOA uses because it wants to make sure that students and applicants are exploring the full gamut of what's involved in an industry. Is there growth in the industry? Will a consumer be able to train in that industry and then continue training to move upward in that industry? So career pathways is very, very prevalent in WIOA. If we were to look at work-based learning experiences in integrated settings, these experiences may include opportunities that are in school, after school, or outside the traditional school setting, including internships. The work-based learning experiences must be provided in the community to the maximum extent possible. VR agencies are to exhaust all opportunities for work-based learning experiences in integrated settings before placing an individual in a non-integrated setting, and we will learn the difference in those definitions going forward as well. So some examples of work-based learning experiences. They might include coordinating a school-based program of job training and informational interviews to research employers. This is a project that can be done, in a classroom setting, whereas students can select employers of interest and just do some research about the employer. Worksite tours to learn about necessary job skills. Participating in some job shadowing opportunities and mentoring opportunities in the community. Also, work-based learning experiences can include paid or unpaid internships, apprenticeships, short-term employment, fellowships, or on-the-job training in the community. If we were to look at counseling on opportunities for enrollment in comprehensive transition or post-secondary education programs at institutions of higher education, this is basically orienting students to vocational schools, colleges, programs that provide additional training beyond high school. An overview of examples that can be completed on an individual basis or in a group setting are advising students and parents or representatives on academic curricula. What kind of programs and courses does this particular vocational institution offer? Providing information about college application and admissions processes. What's required? Do they require an SAT or an ACT score? Are there other types of admissions requirements that are required and what they are? Completing the free application for federal student aid or the FAFSA. Providing resources that may be used to support individual student success in education and training. For example, disability support services. Making sure that the colleges or the vocational schools that the student is interested in have a disability support service organization that can assist them with getting accommodations if they need so. Also, discussing various course offerings with the student, career options, the types of academic and occupational training needed to succeed in the workplace, and post-secondary opportunities associated with career fields or pathways. Workplace readiness training. If we were to look at some examples of workplace readiness training, these services are offered in a generalized manner in a classroom or other such group or individual setting to provide programming to assist students with disabilities to develop social skills and independent living skills necessary to prepare for eventual employment. These services could teach skills such as communication and interpersonal skills, financial literacy, for example, how to budget, how to allocate money for transportation once the paychecks start rolling, group orientation and mobility skills, for example, to access workplace readiness training or to learn to travel independently, how to contact Access Link or other paratransit organizations that can help the student travel train, job-seeking skills, and understanding employer expectations for punctuality and performance, as well as other soft skills necessary for employment. These are all examples of workplace readiness training, but it's not a complete or exhaustive list. It's just basically giving you some examples of some of the training that can take place when there's a need for it. If we were to look at self-advocacy, instruction in self-advocacy services may include the following: individual and classroom instruction, which allows students to learn about their rights and responsibilities, learn how to request accommodations or services and supports, communicate their thoughts, concerns, and needs in order to prepare them for peer mentoring opportunities with individuals working in their areas of interest. So basically learning how to advocate for themselves and to request what's needed in the classroom or in the workplace. Also conducting informational interviews, mentoring with educational staff such as principals, nurses, teachers, or office staff, or mentoring with individuals employed by or volunteering for employers, boards, associates, or organizations in integrated community settings, and participating in youth leadership activities offered in education or community settings. These are just some examples of how students and youth can gain self-advocacy skills, which are needed in the workplace. So when we discuss pre-employment transition coordination, as a counselor, it's very important that counselors are attending IEP meetings when invited. We suggest that child study teams and coordinators provide as much notice as possible prior to the meeting, because we have to keep in mind that counselors have a general caseload, and we also have a large caseload of adult participants as well, and not just working with school districts. So the more notice, the better. We also are working with the local workforce development boards, one-stop centers, and employers to develop work opportunities for students with disabilities. We're also working with schools to coordinate and ensure the provision of pre-employment transition services. And when available, attending person-centered planning meetings for students with disabilities receiving Social Security services when invited. So if we were to look at our transition-related services as they relate to pre-employment transition services, just to summarize, as a continuum of services available to students and youth with disabilities through the VR program. When it comes to pre-employment transition services, which are those 5 that we discussed in the prior slides, these services are only available to students with disabilities, and we do not require an application or an IPE for these 5 services. When we look at group transition services, they're available to both students and youth with disabilities, and once again, an application and an IPE are not required. But we have to keep in mind that we're talking about the 5 services that I discussed previously. When we start thinking about individualized transition and other VR services, which are our traditional services like vocational training, assistive technology, college sponsorship, vehicle modifications, services such as those, they're only available to all eligible individuals, and we do require an application and an IPE. We also need to address the financial responsibilities of the VR agencies and the local education agencies or your school districts. The local education agencies are responsible for providing and paying for any transition service that is considered special education or related services necessary for ensuring a free, appropriate public education as required under IDEA or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Nothing under Title I of the Rehabilitation Act shall be construed as reducing an LEA's obligation to provide the services under IDEA. Pre-employment transition services and transition services can be both vocational rehabilitation services under the VR program and special education or related services under IDEA. Let's move on to define competitive employment and integrated employment, which is very, very important in WIOA. Competitive integrated employment, competitive earnings component. Under the definition of competitive integrated employment, earnings must be equal to or greater than the federal, state, or local minimum wage rate, whichever is higher, where the place of employment is located, and comparable to the customary rate paid by the employer to employees without disabilities in similar positions with comparable skills, experience, and training. The employee with a disability also must receive benefits comparable to those of employees without disabilities in similar positions. Let me give you an example of this. If there are 2 employees or 2 persons applying for a job at the same employer, one person with a disclosed disability and one person without, with the same amount of education and experience listed in that application, the employer cannot start the person with the disability off at $8.44 an hour, which is New Jersey's minimum wage, and give the person without the disability $9.44 an hour. They can't do that. That's considered illegal. They can't foresee that there's going to be an issue with the person with the disability and therefore try to rationalize that that's the reason why they're starting that individual off at a lower rate, even though it's at the state minimum. So that's one example of what this definition means. If we were to look at competitive integrated employment and what that means as far as location, VR agencies must determine on a case-by-case basis whether the employment satisfies 2 criteria. The first is it in a setting typically found in the community? And is it in a setting in which the individual with the disability interacts while performing his or her job duties with employees without disabilities in the work unit and the entire employment site and other persons, for example, vendors and customers without disabilities, to the same extent that employees without disabilities in similar positions interact with these persons? It's typically found in the community means a setting in the competitive labor market. So integrated employment means community-based employment that's not affiliated with a community rehab program or a sheltered workshop. Settings established by the CRPs, which is the community rehab programs, specifically for the purpose of employing individuals with disabilities, are not integrated settings because they are not in the competitive labor market. Competitive integrated employment opportunities for advancement component. In addition, the employee with a disability must be eligible for the same opportunities for advancement as are available to employees without disabilities in similar positions. So in a nutshell, basically, the employee with a disability and comparable work skills and training has to earn the same amount as a person without a disability, and the employment has to be in the community to the maximum extent possible with persons without a disability. So those are your definitions for those two. We need to examine Section 511, which is also changed in WIOA. This is changes in the use of subminimum wage employment or sheltered employment. So under WIOA, no youth age 24 and under can be referred for extended employment or the sheltered workshop unless all 5 required pre-employment transition services have been provided either through the local education agency, which is a school, or DVRS. Documentation has to demonstrate that the student has attempted pre-employment transition services over a reasonable amount of time and has not been successful prior to the referral for extended employment. The extended employment provider must maintain copies of any relevant records to maintain compliance with U.S. Department of Labor, wage and hour regulations. This piece is very important for schools because we have to demonstrate that we've offered pre-employment transition services to youth age 24 and under before they can be referred to a sheltered workshop. And we have to have the documentation that demonstrates what services were offered and what the outcome of the services are. Let's now review the DVRS referral process. It's encouraged that students be referred to DVRS when a student has expressed a desire to work in competitive employment, the student is age 14 to 21 in school and 14 to 24 out of school and can benefit from pre-employment transition services and transition services. A student has a significant disability, either physical, cognitive, and/or mental impairment, as documented in an IEP, 504 plan, and/or other evaluations or medical records. The student will require services from DVRS based on his or her disability-related needs in order to be successfully employed. Steps in the DVRS process. The referral. Being referred to DVRS is the first step. School staff typically make the referral to DVRS. This fosters the collaboration between the school and DVRS and can streamline the process of obtaining school documentation related to the student's disability. Students and parents are encouraged to ask the school to make the referral to DVRS or may do so themselves if this has not happened well before the student's exit from the school. But we have to keep in mind that the referral form is not an application. So steps in the referral process. An application, which is not required for pre-employment transition services, but it is required for regular transition services. Eligibility determination, which is based on significance of disability and how the disability impacts the ability to work. Developing the individual plan for employment with the DVRS counselor, which indicates an employment goal, and obtaining employment based on individual strengths, abilities, and skills after attainment and completion of vocational rehabilitation services. What records are needed? A copy of the student's most recent psychological, social, and learning assessments, which should include a diagnosis from the New Jersey Administrative Code and a current assessment of academic functioning. The Department of Education's vocational profile, as found on the DOE website, is an important tool to assist with planning as it documents strengths and limitations in functional terms and may note work interests and abilities gained through community work experience. An assessment of the student's social skill levels and behavioral or safety issues should be included. Reports from structured learning experiences, SLEs, or community-based instruction, job sampling sites. Results from interest testing, pertinent medical or psychiatric evaluations. Student self-report of future career goals. A copy of the student's summary of performance, which is usually developed in the senior year. I've attached some available resources to you. As I said earlier, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but these are some of the websites that I found very helpful for families and for schools through the years, but there are tons more out there. This is the DVRS contact information, our physical location. We have a toll-free number, a direct dial number, and a fax number, email address, and our website address. We have 18 local offices throughout the state covering 21 counties. Contact information is listed here. Take note that our Hackettstown office is temporarily relocated to our Randolph office. Once they are back in place, that will be updated as well. But for right now, if you're trying to reach our Hackettstown office, you would need to contact our Randolph office. This is my contact information, my phone number, direct dial phone number, my fax number, and my email address. And I thank you for this opportunity to present to you today.
Thank you, Sherry. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
As people are, I will leave your contact information up so people have it.
Sure.
I'm wondering if, and I thought of it as you were talking, and such great information. I'm wondering if you could share with us some innovative program examples you've seen across our state, like something that you've seen either a school district doing or an organization with regard to pre-employment transition that you kind of were like, wow, that's really creative. That's really a great idea.
Well, the first thing is that there are many districts that provide transition services very, very effectively. They've been doing it for quite a bit of time, and they know exactly what they're doing. They're very successful with their transition programs. There are other districts within the state that are struggling, either through budget or financial issues or whatever the situation is. But the programs that I see functioning really, really well are those programs where naturally there's strong leadership with their superintendents and their child study team directors and so forth. They have really, really good employer relationships. They've developed relationships with employers in their counties, and they rely on these employers for school to work opportunities and structured learning experiences and things like that. I think that's going to be key with pre-employment transition, because of the 5 required services, the work-based learning experiences, the internships, the apprenticeships, that component is going to be really, really important for students, especially for that population that don't really plan on going right into college after high school or getting any post-secondary training. They just want to go right into the workplace. So that component is going to be very, very important for them. So when I see effective transition programs in the counties, there's always strong employer relationships taking place.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. In those places where you see that, and I agree with you 100%, I think we could have the best programs planned out, but if we're missing that connection of that community engagement piece, we're kind of in a standstill almost.
Right, absolutely.
I'm wondering if you could think of some suggestions of strategies or best practices that we could give people to help them build those relationships in their community. How do you engage those employers and those businesses to show them that this is something that can be incredibly beneficial for them?
I'm always a firm believer of just showing up, making an introduction, possibly through a letter, say, hey, this is who I am. I work with this population of students. I have quite a few students interested in learning more about what you do. possibly for future career opportunities. When can we meet to discuss this a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, that's a great idea. The proactive kind of right at you approach. So I'm going to take a direct line right at you. Yeah, that's a really good point. That's excellent. I'm looking. I don't see any other questions from people in the audience. I was just thinking of some things that had come to me as I was listening to you speak.
Sure.
And I thought those were really great. As we go forward, I'm glad people were here. I hope you found this information valuable. You have Sherry's information there. You can certainly reach out to her if you need additional information about this or questions or pretty much anything at all. Feel free. I'm sure she'd be happy to point you in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Obviously, a wealth of information in this topic, so I appreciate that.
Sure.
Let me just, if Sherry, I could get you to release the screen so I can take it back for 2 seconds.
Sure.
Thank you. I'll wrap up for everybody, and we'll move on about our day here. Let me share my screen. There we go. All right. So as we go forward, we will provide anybody who was participating in the webinar with a certificate of attendance, which will show that you were here for the hour to listen to the webinar. But we ask you to fill out a survey first. So you can find that survey at bit.ly/atdemosurvey. That will go through. It'll ask you some information about the webinar, and then we will provide you with a certificate for this learning experience. We have our upcoming webinar coming, and actually that is a typo on that slide. I apologize. It is October 15th, not November 15th. Sorry about that. Okay. It is October 15th at 12 o'clock, and we're going to be talking about built-in accessibility features of mobile devices. Oh, that one has typos all over it. Oh man, I'm doing a horrible job with that one. I did such a horrible job that I'm going to get out of it and change it as I talk to you guys, because that is just horribly wrong. So it's 10 and it is not mobility.
Happens to all of us.
I know, right? I'm looking at it going, that's not right. There we go. At October 15th, 12 to 1 o'clock, we'll talk about built-in features of mobile devices. We'll send out some information on how people can sign up for that. So we hope that you'll join us for that one as well. And again, I want to take a minute, thank the people that participated today, that were here to watch the webinar in person. Anybody who watches it afterwards, thank you. Sherry, I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for sharing this great information.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, thank you. And for everyone else, we hope to see you at a future webinar. Thanks very much. Have a good rest of the day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.